Time to chat about how I made these water-resistant spell books. The books are situated under and around my cauldron fountain. Like any outdoor decoration, weather is always an issue, and these books are splashed on consistently, so I needed them to be extra durable. Hopefully how I made these can help some of you out. If nothing else, maybe something here will be a good starting point or serve as a little inspiration. I glued together pieces of scrap insulation foam board I had laying around with Gorilla Glue. The blue and purple in this pic are just both insulation foam board, different brands, same thing. I use up what I have. I carved the rounded edges out with a heat knife to get the shape I was looking for. For the open book, I did the same, but carved the foam into the shape of an open book. Sorry, I failed to take a pic before I added the clay, but this gives you an idea of what that looked like. Then I added the cover. I used EVA foam and glued it to the book base. I glued it on one side, let it dry, and then pulled it tight to the other side and glued it to that side. Simply weigh it down with books or something heavy while the glue dries. So this is how I added what looks like paper pages to the edges. I used epoxy sculpt for this. It is a quick air drying clay that is waterproof. It dries relatively fast, so you can't dilly-dally when you use this stuff. If you've not used it before, I recommend you do a little research on it first. It activates after you mix A and B in equal parts. Using a clay machine, I rolled out long pieces of clay. Be aware, once this stuff is dry, it's rock hard. So as soon as I was done rolling out the piece I wanted, I ran a wet paper towel through the machine and then draped the machine with a wet hand towel until I could get back to it to clean it properly. I didn't have any issues getting mine clean and clay-free. But realize you do this at your own risk. You could also use a roller. Please only use the roller for clay. You don't want to contaminate a food roller. I will warn you as well, this clay can get sticky. Water is your friend when using it. Keeping a spray bottle of water and paper towels handy is smart. The clay is an amazing product, but I would highly recommend you play around with it for a bit before jumping ahead into a project with it. You'll be glad you did. I pressed the long piece of clay onto one side of the book. Trimmed it down to fit, then using various clay tools, I carved pages into it. I used a ruler to score a center line and a couple other lines that helped me keep my lines somewhat straight. I didn't want them perfectly straight. That isn't the right look for this project, but I didn't want it to be too wonky either. You need to work quickly because this piece of clay is thin, it's going to dry quick, so no lollygagging. Then I just repeated the same steps on each side. At the corner edges, I pinched them together as the clay wasn't completely dry, and then added the pages and scored the lines to match up. After the epoxy sculpt is dry, I went back and did a little sanding and cleanup on the pages. Then I painted the paper sides. I started off with a layer of ivory, then building with watered down brown paints to add aging and dimension. I layered on the paint and then wiped off excess and repeated until I was happy with the result. I used the same process on the open book. Here's what it looked like when that process was done. I also wrapped the clay inward just a little bit to clean up the edges. Now let's talk about the cover of the large book. I added notches and nicks into the EVA foam cover. I wanted it to look old, like it had been handed down from witchy great-grandmothers to their great-great witchy granddaughters for generations. I used my heat knife, utility knives, sandpaper, steel wool to age the cover. All right, now for the fun part, paint. I added layers and layers of various brown paints. I also even used a few reds and oranges in there. I used acrylic paint, specifically Liquitex Professional Soft Body Acrylic. It's been a favorite paint of mine for decades now. This is a video of how it looks now, so you can see it survived a month of being outside and under a water feature. You can see a ring on the top, that's where the cauldron base of the water feature sat. So it held up really well. I added a light clear coat of spray paint after. I always look for one with UV protection in it. I love how this book turned out. I added moss around where the base of the cauldron sat, and because I ran out of time, it's actually missing a few details. I plan on adding them this year. So toadstools and a few frogs will be joining the cauldron fountain this year, and I'm excited to get this finished the way it was meant to be. Skipping back to the open book, I needed to create waterproof paper for this top. I used a product called Worbla for this. These Worbla sheets are manipulated by heat. First, I cut it to the size I needed, and then using a heat gun, I warmed it up until it was pliable. I played with it as it sat on top of the book, curving the edges with pens and manipulating it until it cooled. I did a couple layers of Worbla so it had a few old curved book pages. Be a bit careful, it will tear with too much heat. As you can see right here, it did tear, but the good news is that it can be reheated and remolded over and over again. Or you can just slap on a bookmark over it like I did, no one knows. Anyway, Worbla is pretty cool stuff. Then I painted it using ivory spray paint. I again used brown paints to add dimension, just like I did on the pages of the large book. I splattered a bit of paint for added character. The bookmark is also just a piece of Worbla, heated and shaped. I used a paint marker to draw the mushroom and recipe I created for Death Cap Stew. I spray painted the ribbon bookmark red, however that spray paint faded terribly in the sun, so I'll be repainting that this year with different paint. So here are the books with the water feature, and it worked. These books were splattered on and out in the sun all October, and they still look great. I'm super duper happy with how they held up and how they turned out.